Hey there! Are you an entrepreneur looking to start, launch, or grow a podcast? If you said yes, I am so happy you're here. I'm Kristen, a video and podcast producer and CEO of Novice Studios, a production company for podcasters. I help business owners launch and grow their podcasts to serve their audience, build community, and boost sales. I hope you'll subscribe to our show so we can help your show grow from novice to noteworthy. Welcome back to the Novice to Noteworthy podcast. I am here with my friend Janna Carlson, who's going to share all the ins and outs of her web design business, how she has quit social media and taken on having a podcast as her nurture and visibility tool, and just like some basic web design things that we can keep in mind. So welcome, Janna, to the podcast.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm excited to be here.
Yay, I'm so excited to have you. So if you wouldn't mind starting out just sharing a little bit of your background on your business, what you and your husband do, and just a little bit about your digital nomad journey.
The interesting start to this story is that I've been a piano teacher for most of my adult life. And I built my first website on Squarespace, and then I leveraged that to create really big growth in my studio. So that was kind of how I dipped my toes into web design. And my husband, Jeremy, was an audio engineer at the time. And so his attention to detail is another level from mine. And he really enjoys learning curves with tech and that kind of thing. And he had always been interested in finding a way that we could work together. We're both musicians. We're both kind of creatively oriented. And so in 2018, we launched Studio Rocket Web Design, our web design business. And we started out working with music teachers. And then a few years later, we expanded to work with all kinds of established small business owners. So a few years ago, full disclosure, it was during 2020 when we were all reassessing our lives. We kind of looked around and assessed and realized that we could work from anywhere. At the time, I was only teaching piano part-time and it was all online. And we realized that we had this level of freedom that we hadn't really imagined previously, and decided that we wanted to try living abroad. So we sold our house, we sold all of our stuff, and we moved to Portugal in 2022. And for those of you who are a little geographically challenged like I am, Portugal sits right next to Spain. So we are just a few hours from the border of Spain, and we live in a cute little surf town about an hour north of Lisbon now.
That is awesome. That sounds like a dream. My husband and I have been talking about the idea of like, should we move to New Zealand? Should we just like try it? And it sounds so wild, but when you think about all the possibilities for your life and that you really can choose your own adventure, I'll have to like pick your brain in a separate conversation about the process of like choosing where you're going to move to and getting a visa and all that stuff, if that's relevant. So I would love to talk about your podcast. So you have a podcast with your husband. It's on your website for your web design business. So what led you to start a podcast in the first place?
It took us a while to decide to start it. I have seen trust become a much bigger factor in the service providers that clients choose to work with. So I think the days of like seeing a post that you like on social media and deciding to work with that person are pretty much over. And I think that building a relationship is the most important place to start. And so Jeremy and I talked about, should we start a YouTube channel? Should we start a podcast? I had been blogging at the time, but was seeing that be less effective because even blogging didn't seem to connect with folks like it used to. And actually, I listened to your episode on YouTube channel versus podcast, and I really enjoyed it. And I think ideally we would have done both, but we had to like focus our efforts. And so we decided that a podcast would be kind of a lower lift for us. It would be an easier commitment. And we decided to just experiment with it for a few months and see what happened. So we dove in, we decided that we would make it a 5-minute podcast. We wanted to do something unique. And so we thought we can try this and just see, how it works. And so our podcast kind of allows us to start building that relationship with our audience. And also because Jeremy and I are a little bit unique in working together as a husband and wife duo, we thought it might be interesting to let people get to know us a little bit and kind of get a sense of our vibe and see if we feel like the right fit to them.
I love that. So then having a 5-minute podcast episode, I think sounds really appealing to a lot of people. There's a lot of prep that you have to do to get something that condensed put together. But initially, how did you decide 5 minutes was the perfect length? And then also, how did you decide on the cadence? So, how often do you publish new episodes and how did you choose that?
As we were deciding how to structure the podcast, I was really aware that my own attention span with content is really short. And Jeremy's attention span for creating content is very short. And so while it was a cool idea to think of putting out like a 45-minute podcast episode every week or every 2 weeks, I knew that just wasn't realistic. And I also knew that if we wanted to grow the audience of people who are willing to spend that time with us, we would have to be really mindful of their time and attention. And so I thought it might be a big ask to see if people would spend 45 minutes with us, but maybe 5 minutes is enough to just like turn it on, listen to it for a couple minutes, and then you're done, right? So we thought that it would not contribute as much to our content overwhelm. And then we also wanted for it to be easy for us to be consistent with, so that if we looked back and decided, yeah, this is a worthwhile use of our time, we can be consistent with this. And so we started just with one episode per month. And honestly, we weren't even super consistent with it because we had life circumstances, as we all do. But it seemed to connect with people. And so at the beginning of 2024, we actually moved to 2 episodes per month. So it's been really fairly simple to stick with the commitment of 5 minutes twice a month. And I think that's largely due to the length.
Absolutely. That is always my top advice for people when they're like, I don't know about the time commitment of having a podcast. The shorter your episodes, the less time it takes to prep for the episode, to record the episode, and then to edit and produce the episode. So I think that that's awesome. And how do you prepare for that 5-minute format? Because I think for some people, they're like 45 minutes feels really intimidating, but then you get to talking. And especially if you have a co-host, like you and your husband are hosting this together, you can get into that conversation. And then before you know it, 30 minutes have passed. So how do you make sure that you keep it in that 5-minute window?
It's surprisingly hard because the reasons you just said. So my husband is very introverted and he would probably prefer that I do all of the talking. So that helps a little bit. He doesn't like monopolize the conversation, but still we can get into it. You're right. So we used to script out the episodes, but then that felt a little bit forced and unnatural. So now I just create a few talking points for us. We chat our way through them and then we record it twice. So the 2 takes is really important. The first take is usually about twice the length that we want, sometimes a little more. And I usually lose it at some point and like burst out laughing. And we allow ourselves to be like a little bit more long-winded and kind of silly during that first take. And then the second take is like it. It comes in right at 5 minutes. It's much tighter and it allows us to really hone in on the words that feel important to say. So I've gotten better at describing things in fewer words, I think. Something I'm always working on. And then a fun fact about our podcast is that because we're both musicians, we composed and recorded our own podcast theme, which was really fun.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, I love that. I know one of our clients, her husband is a musician, and so she's the only one that we have on our roster who has custom music, but that is so much fun, and it sounds like it's a really fun dynamic between the two of you, and I think to your point, like, having that first take when your goal is 5 minutes, if you go a little bit over, you're only re-listening to a 10-15 minute soundbite, right? As opposed to a 45-minute situation. And I love that you guys take the time to record it a second time because it's that much tighter. You could theoretically sit there and edit a 15-minute episode down to 5 minutes, right? But that would take more time than it would to just record it that second time and tighten it up a little bit.
Right. And I think that we're both a lot more confident the second time through. It's like the first time is experimental and it doesn't have much of a risk to it. And then that second time we're like, okay, we have a sense of how this flows and how we're interacting with each other. And it's almost like, we have to practice a little bit before we're ready to kind of give that performance. And then that second take just feels a lot more natural and comes from a place of confidence.
That's awesome, and I love that you talked about the script feeling kind of forced, on the recording side. I think people can hear that. Like, you might feel it as the host if you feel a little bit constricted by a script, but listeners can feel that too. So I love that you've kind of worked your way back to an outline. That's always our goal with clients too. I think the script is a good starting off place, but if you can get to the point where just those bullet point outlines will get you to the end result, that's definitely ideal for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
What feedback have you gotten on your podcast? Because I think putting together the 5-minute episodes, it sounds so good in theory, but what has been the actual result? And what have you heard from your listeners about the podcast as a whole?
The thing that people usually say is, "It's only 5 minutes long. That is so cool. I love that it's just 5 minutes." So I think sort of the content fatigue is real, and I think that we have maybe tapped into something, even if it's just something small, that feels a little bit refreshing to people about keeping it really short, because that is absolutely the biggest piece of feedback we've gotten. The thing I wasn't expecting is that the majority of our feedback has come from our clients, actually. So we've been in business for 6 years. We've got a fairly large client base at this point. And some of them only work with us once, but a lot of them do come back and work with us multiple times. And I assumed that the clients who have already worked with us wouldn't really be interested in kind of keeping up, but the opposite has been true. And they seem a little bit even more invested than people who have not been our clients yet. And so we'll have a client reach out fairly frequently and say, "I really enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed the little update about what's going on in your lives." And then it's not really a surprise when they come back to work with us again, a few months later, another year later. And so it feels to me like the podcast has had this added benefit of being a relationship builder with our clients, of helping us to stay in touch with them and helping them to feel like they're getting to know us a little bit more. And so then when it's time to trust someone with their website needs again, they absolutely turn to us. So that has been really delightful. That's been a delightful perk of the podcast.
That's really interesting because some of the conversations that I've been having with people in the like YouTube versus podcast topic, if you will, is that YouTube is great for discoverability, but
Mm.
podcasting is all about nurturing that relationship. So we know that like podcast search isn't quite up to speed to what Google and YouTube can do for you. But to your point, people are getting those updates, and it's not like you guys are sitting down and doing 30 whole minutes on, like, what you had for dinner that day, right? Like, you're getting to the point of the most important things that are happening in your lives. So they're getting that update on how you guys are doing. It's a super quick soundbite, and then they're getting actionable tips from you guys. It is a great way, to your point, to nurture that relationship, and I think that sometimes we get so caught up in how do I get in front of new people, new people, new people, which is a lot of the goal of social media, which we're going to get into. It's also about how do I get the people that have already worked with me and enjoyed my work to come back and become a repeat customer in some way. So I think that that's amazing, and that's such a good like testament to the podcast that you're producing. So you quit social media, and I'm really interested to hear about that because I've talked to so many people who are like, I'm spending all this time on Instagram or LinkedIn, and I've never once gotten a client from social media. So what made you decide to quit social media? And then how has your podcast allowed you to, connect with people outside of those platforms?
Over the last few months, let's see, maybe over the past 6 months, I watched several people that I know step away from social media, and they did it kind of as a trial period. And then they didn't come back. They were like, "Oh no, I'm not coming back. I love this." So it was kind of in the back of my mind. And then early in the new year, I just took kind of a hard look at how much of my energy and time was being spent on social media. And most of it was probably personal, but then some of it was also business. So, for most of us, probably it's a little bit mixed, a little complex. But I wasn't loving how much energy and time I was investing there. And I started noticing how I felt after I would spend a session on Instagram or Facebook. And I didn't love it. And over time, I just thought, I might step away for a while and see. And by the time I was actually ready to step away, I thought, I think this might be permanent. I don't know. So I tried, I stepped away. And the interesting thing was that even though it is, it can be a bit of an addiction, like, we're constantly scrolling and I'm standing in line at the post office and I immediately reach for my phone and pull up Instagram, we all do it. But I was surprised that I didn't really miss it. I figured I would have to use a little bit more self-discipline to keep from clicking on those apps, and I really didn't. It was like other things filled in those spaces really easily. And so over the next few weeks, I felt a greater sense of calm. It was a little bit more noticeable in terms of my mental health, even than I had expected. So I will say I do use Facebook a little bit to stay in touch with a couple of groups, especially local resources in Portugal. Facebook is used pretty widely for that. And then a lot of Portuguese businesses don't have websites. They're either on Facebook or on Instagram. And so I've kept my accounts for both. I just don't really use them unless I need them. Um, and I did stay on LinkedIn, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But anyway, as I was thinking about it in terms of our business, I had the same realization that you mentioned your clients having, and that is that our clients do not ever come from social media. Perhaps someone recommends us in a group that they're part of, but as far as people connecting with our content on social media and deciding to work with us, to my knowledge, I don't think it's ever happened. And the pressure to continue posting on social media, I wasn't doing really well with. I wasn't being very consistent. But when I would post, it just, it didn't, our clients weren't seeing us. Our potential clients weren't seeing us. It was like friends and, our business colleagues, but clients weren't seeing us. So I decided I wanted to prioritize one-to-one connections. So instead of being on social media, I spend my time meeting with other people who work with our potential audience, like you, and build relationships with people. And then when someone reaches out to me to introduce themselves or to ask for some website help, then I see that as a chance to bring value to our relationship and to build trust. And whether or not that develops into a client relationship, it's often very beneficial. And I'd much rather sort of put my time away there and not see a return for it in a one-on-one relationship than put my time and energy into social media and not see a return. So to me, the time I've been able to invest in building relationships one-on-one has been really valuable. And as kind of a nice dovetail to that, the podcast has worked really well. Since getting off social media, we haven't had fewer downloads. In fact, they have increased. And I don't know how valuable downloads are at our particular phase of our podcast and business, but it's, it's a handy metric, right? And those have actually grown. So it feels like a really nice way to continue to build those relationships. And so I see the podcast as almost like a good alternative to social media.
I'm so curious about this because I think a lot of people are burnt out on the content creation game in general. And while I think all the different platforms can work together, you can pull clips from your podcast and post them on social media and all the things. If you're not actually getting clients from social media and you just find yourself scrolling, I'm speaking for myself because this is me in this current day and age. And then also the comparison game, I feel like when we're both in creative industries where there's tons of podcast producers out there, there's a lot of different web design companies out there. And I find that I have a lot of people following me who are also podcast producers, and then I follow them back, and then I'm comparing like what we're doing to what they're doing, and then it's like, what is the point of this? Like, this is such a waste of energy. And to
Yes.
your point, a lot of my clients come from those one-on-one conversations, and those conversations are so much more fulfilling than a comment on a post, if you even get comments on your post, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's really
Yeah.
cool. And tell me about LinkedIn. You said you kept your LinkedIn. How are you leveraging that platform?
So not as well as I could be, but again, I'm going to give social media a backseat. But I like LinkedIn because it seems like my target audience is actually more there. I mean, that's where business owners are hanging out, is on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is not, it doesn't feel like as much of a losing game with the algorithm either. So when I publish a podcast episode, I share it primarily through our newsletter. And then I also post it on LinkedIn. And it just tends to be a better point of connection. It doesn't feel as, I don't find myself scrolling LinkedIn a lot. And I'm more apt to find people that I really want to connect with on LinkedIn. And interestingly, you mentioned the comparison game, and I would 100% agree with everything you said. And I don't see that happening as much on LinkedIn. I don't know if it's because it's not as much of a visual platform or what, but it really tends to be more sort of to the point of what you want to share than sort of like a display for your content, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I am a fan of LinkedIn, although I don't use it a lot. I'll play with it. I'll run an official experiment soon. But for now, yeah. So those are the two places that I share our podcast, and they feel good for now.
And I think to your point, for LinkedIn, it definitely feels more like a relationship building tool than like a vanity tool, if you will, like Instagram is, to your point of like, look at this beautiful branding and here's, the showcase of all the things. It feels like on LinkedIn, I can actually talk about the results of something or, dive into what's going on in my business and it's reaching the right people versus having to like fight for the algorithm for visibility, like you said. I think
I
that's
agree.
a frustration for a lot of people is they're putting all this time and effort into a post and then only 5 people see it, and of those 5 people, nobody's even booking a discovery call, so, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I
And
agree.
so you share your podcast with your email newsletter and then
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
Like, how are you sharing that content? Do you put your show notes? Is it a summary? Do you create a graphic for your podcast? Like, what does that look like to promote each episode on those platforms for you?
I find that if I'm going to be consistent with something, I need to make it easy to replicate and simple.
Mhm.
So we have a graphic that I use for all of our episodes, unless there's really a unique or special one. So I don't create a new graphic. And then I just write a brief summary. And anywhere I share that in my newsletter or on LinkedIn, I will use that summary. I'm a big fan of reusing content. um, so I just want to keep it as easy for myself as possible because if anything starts to consume too much of my time or I have to start from scratch each time I do it, then I know that consistency is just going to fly out the window.
I'm the exact same way. If I can create a template for myself and take the time to do it once and then just update that template each time, I think that that's the best way to do it. We have a show notes template that we create for each of our clients. So we're, not starting from scratch for their stuff, even. It just makes it so much easier in your workflow. And have you found that when you like post episodes on LinkedIn, like were there any episodes or sharing formats, like if you shared a clip from the episode or you shared that synopsis, like something that resonated more than others or seemed to perform better than others?
Last month, I had my first guest on our podcast where instead of Jeremy and I, it was myself and a client of ours. She was our very first client, and her business grew just insanely over the next 5 or so years. And so then she came back to us last year and we rebuilt her website, or we built her a new website that was more of a workhorse for her, a more powerful site. And she immediately had really good results from that website. And so I asked if she'd be willing to come on and chat with me about her journey as a business owner and her priorities in her website, and kind of to give people a sense of what their website can do for them in addition to just bringing in new clients. And that episode was by far our most popular, actually. And it was interesting because I was kind of running a test around it. I thought it would be fun to interview an occasional client, but I had heard recently that that guest podcasts didn't seem to do as well. So you'll have to let me know how this one does. um, and I thought, I wonder if that's true, and I wonder if our short format will help that. I don't know.
Mhm.
So yeah, it went really well, and I don't know if it was that she shared it to her audience and other people were more likely to share it, but for whatever reason, that was our most popular episode. And so I'm looking forward to experimenting with more guest interviews in the future.
I love that. I love when a recent episode, like, all of a sudden takes off. That always feels good. Usually the older episodes, they have more time to accumulate those downloads, so they, are at the top of the list. So in our experience, the guest episodes perform better in terms of downloads than solo episodes, but solo episodes are better for conversion to becoming clients and downloading your freebie and things like that because they position you as the expert. But in a scenario like you just described, where you're bringing on a past client, that is an amazing case study and testimonial. So you still stay the expert in that conversation, right? And that's a great episode then to share after you have discovery calls with people like, hey, check out this case study that we had with a client who not only was one of our very first clients to work with us, and you guys have grown in those 5 years probably just as much as she has, right? And now she's come back to you for this new project that then got her more results. Like that is like the holy grail of testimonials right there. So
Yeah.
that is now an amazing nurture tool that you have in your back pocket. You have the whole library of podcast episodes, but this specifically is a great one to share with prospective clients that are considering hiring you for the first time.
That's a really great point. And it's interesting the data that you bring up about which type of episode is more effective for which purpose. That's really fascinating. I'll have to keep tracking those metrics a little bit more closely and see how it plays out. We have another episode that we recorded about a year ago about our web design process. And we recorded that specifically to kind of show what a journey is with us, like, the journey of having us build your website. And to be able to condense that down into a 5-minute episode, we felt like that might be a really good tool. Now, before I book a discovery call with a potential client, I send them to that episode so that they can not only get a sense of our process, but also they feel like they know us a little bit before I even jump on the call with the client. So I think that you're right, you can utilize those past episodes in unique ways that can continue to benefit your business down the road. It's an interesting topic, right? To view that, because kind of like I would view a blog post in the past, right? Like a blog post that I would send clients to explain X, Y, and Z. Yeah, really valuable.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And
Yeah.
I definitely feel like one of the beautiful things about podcasting is it's such an accessible medium. And so, if somebody doesn't want to sit and read through a blog post, they can then listen to the episode. You could always take that transcript and then turn it into a blog post or turn it into a LinkedIn article or something like that. But having something that people can just listen into or watch is just great from an engagement perspective, and an accessibility perspective as well.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything else that you would like to share about your podcasting journey or where people can learn more about you and your business?
Absolutely. We are at studiorocketwebdesign.com and we keep things pretty simple. So you can find our podcast right there on our website, or you can find us on, your favorite podcast listening platform. And we've got a newsletter. So if you're interested in following along, we've got those two things.
Well, thank you so much, Janna, for being on the podcast. I appreciate you. You're our first guest that we've
Ooh, I'm
so,
so happy.
yeah, so I'm excited, and I think we still kept this at a pretty good length. Oh, I have a quick follow-up question to your guest that you had on. So was that a 5-minute episode too, or did that end up being a little bit longer?
No, it was not a 5-minute episode. We failed. It was a 10-minute episode. So I retitled it. It's really difficult. It's one thing to share like 3 bullet points in 5 minutes, but if you're sharing someone's story, whittling it down in an interview format to 5 minutes is incredibly difficult. You're asking them to tell their story in like 3 sentences. So, and she and I actually did 2 takes. The first take was maybe like 18 minutes, and then the second take was 10. So once again, the 2 takes served us really well. But yeah, we felt like our audience would probably forgive us that one time.
Yeah, yes, and definitely, if they're used to 5-minute episodes and then you hit them with a 10-minute episode, they're like, "Okay," like, te
Yeah.
it's double, but also
Yeah.
still only 10 minutes, so I
Right.
think that that's amazing, and I was curious about that too for people that wanna have that 5-minute episode format, but also wanna bring on guests, what does that look like? And if you book an hour to record with your guests, like you said, there's time for that first take and then tightening it up the second time. So that's amazing and great that, she was willing to work with you in that way too. So
Yeah. She kind of wanted to do a second take. I asked how she felt about it, and she was like, yeah, let's do a second take. I feel like this could be shorter.
yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it worked out well. It was nice. And she seemed like she was pretty confident when we finished. So it was good.
That skill, like you said, it's like a fun challenge to see how you can condense it down further to just the most important pieces. And I find that even, editing through a video where the goal is to get it down to 5 minutes long, it's like, okay, well, this is actually a filler word, or this sentence is actually a repeat of something that she said earlier. So we can cut that out. And I think that it tightens it up so much. It's just a really fun creative challenge, I think.
I agree. I do none of our editing. I will say, Jeremy being the audio engineer, he does that whole thing. All I do is show up in front of the microphone with our talking points. So I feel very lucky. And then he sends me the final file when it's done. So I don't see anything that goes on in the podcast kitchen. But I think he probably would agree with you that it's not that difficult to edit out the redundant stuff. But yeah, I think the two takes usually makes that less necessary, I think, than if we were to try to use that first take.
Well, Janna, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I will make sure that I put the links to the Studio Rocket Design website and LinkedIn, and then your email newsletter opt-in page so that people can subscribe to that and listen to the podcast. So thank you so much again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen. This has been delightful.
That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Written reviews are incredible, but even a quick 5-star review is so helpful for our show. You can also rate us on Spotify. If you listen over there, you can give us 5 stars over there as well. Be sure to follow us over on Instagram and YouTube at Novice Studios CLT, and share the show with a fellow podcaster to spread the word. See you next time.